This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community.
Seated. Good evening again, everybody. My name is Jane Clement. I am the president of Community Forums. At this time, I'd like to welcome up front the executive director of the Kona Kohala Chamber of Commerce, Wendy Laras. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We are hosting and organizing this forum tonight jointly, and our goal tonight is to inform and educate. There are a few questions on the ballot this general election that we will be asked to vote on, and a lot of them we don't know a whole lot about. So this is what the goal of tonight's forum is to give you facts and information so that you can make informed decision. Before I give it to Wendy, I would like to acknowledge really quickly our community partners, McDonald's of Hawaii, owners Robert and Kathy Leopoldino. They generously provide our refreshments at each of these forums. We want to thank the County of Hawaii for allowing us to use this wonderful facility here. And we also would like to thank Naleo TV for allowing us to broadcast this forum after it's done in a few weeks. Wendy?
Thanks. All right, thank you very much. And so welcome everyone. And I also want to give a shout out to the West Hawaii Association of Realtors, who also partnered with us. So the Kona Kohala Chamber of Commerce, Community Forums, the Realtors Association, we've all come together because we think this is very important, that you are informed and educated. So that's the purpose of why we're here tonight. And we're so lucky because we have one of the most seasoned and experienced and professional moderators here on the island of Hawaii and maybe in the entire state. So let's give it up for Sherry Bracken. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you very much. Aloha. Thank you all for being here. This is a really important proposed amendment to the Constitution that we're going to talk about. And you're going to be voting on it when you vote, and I'm assuming all of you are already registered voters. If you are not, the good thing is you have plenty of opportunities to register, because you can register at walk-in voting and you may register also on Election Day. But if you have not yet registered, I urge you to do so in advance at elections.hawaii.gov, just because if you go on voting day, then they're going to have to verify your address and all that, and it'll be a little more time-consuming. There was another forum about this issue last week in Hilo. That is online at BigIslandVideoNews.com. The forum tonight is being recorded, and it will be up on the West Hawaii Community, or the West Hawaii Forum's Facebook page and website. That will also show on Naleo TV. So you have plenty of opportunities to see it again yourself and to suggest to your friends that they see it, because voting on amendments to the Constitution, that's a really, really big responsibility, and people need to understand what they're voting on. This issue will also be taken up tomorrow evening in Waimea at the Waimea Town Meeting at 5:15 at Waimea Middle School. Each of the sponsors' goal was to increase public awareness about this amendment and provide us information so that we may make informed choices. Sound tonight is being provided by Scott Ordway back here, and Isaiah Heyer back there, and David Yap, and they're doing both sound and video. And of course, you can have a fabulous forum, but if you can't hear what's being said, it's not going to work out so well. Now, the general election is Tuesday, November 6th, but absentee ballots will be mailed out starting on October 9th. So you may get your ballot as soon as around the 11th. So that's why it's good that you're here tonight, because you can vote almost any time. And I discovered today from Pat Nakamoto in elections office that 80% of the people who voted on our island in the primary did so absentee, and most of them vote by mail. So that is definitely the trend. In the November election, we're going to vote on 2 county charter amendments, one about the county salary commission and whether they should take public input. The other county charter amendment would require any charter amendments to include financial impact, revenues, expenditures, taxes, fiscal liabilities. And that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but I just wanted to warn you, you need to be prepared that that will be on your ballot. You'll also vote on 2 state questions. One question asks, shall there be a convention to propose a revision of or amendments to the state constitution? And again, we're not discussing that tonight. How many were not at the forum where we talked about that? Okay, a few folks weren't. You may see that forum pretty soon at the West Hawaii Forum's website. It's not there yet, but it will be shortly. It's also going to be on Naleo soon. And the forum included consultant Peter Adler describing the process, Chad Blair of Civil Beat, which has come out in favor of having a constitutional convention, Lei Kihoy, a Kona attorney, talking about why she does not think it's a good idea, and then David Tarnas, who is an environmental consultant and self-described political geek, talking about some of the implications for neighbor islands and giving his input on that topic. I also interviewed Peter Adler about that, and that is on the podcast site for my weekly interview program, Island Issues, lava1053.com, if you want to hear what Peter had to say. It's about a 30-minute interview. Now, tonight we have 5 panelists who represent different viewpoints. I'm going to introduce each one in a little bit of detail, and then each one will have the opportunity to sort of make an opening statement, give you their thoughts, and then we'll take questions. And as always, I urge you to submit questions if you have them. Write them down. If you need a form on which to write the questions and you don't have it, wave your hand wildly, and Mike Matsukawa in the back, even as I speak, is going to the forms, and he will make sure you have one. And the only thing I ask is that you write in big letters so that I can read it, so that I don't make a mistake. We've already had a number of questions submitted. Now, I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight from right to left, and please hold your applause until I've introduced all of them. We are very delighted to have Corey Rosenlee. He is head of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. They're the union representing 13,500 teachers here in Hawaii. He's a national board certified social studies teacher, and he taught public high school for more than 20 years at Kaiser, Kailua, McKinley, Roosevelt, and Campbell High School. He's a longtime activist. He has fought for social justice in Hawaii's public schools, including better pay for teachers, air conditioning classrooms, smaller class sizes, ending high-stakes testing and high-stakes teacher evaluations. His wife is a professor of philosophy at UH West Oahu, and his daughter goes to Campbell High. Next, we have Tom Yamachika. He's the president of the Tax Foundation of Hawaii, a private, nonprofit educational organization dedicated to informing the taxpaying public about the finances of our state and local governments here in Hawaii. The foundation looks at how the government raises and spends money, how it borrows, and how the county governments set property tax rates. Tom got his JD degree, he's a lawyer, from University of California at Berkeley, his bachelor's in engineering and applied science from Yale. He's a tax attorney and has practiced litigation and tax law, and he also worked for a time for the State Department of Taxation. And I'm sure if you read West Hawaii Today, you probably have seen his writings because he writes a column that usually appears on Sunday, sometimes on Monday. State Senator Kai Kahele is with us, representing the state legislature. He's a native Hawaiian from Hilo, the son of the late Senator Gil Kahele, and I have to just say that I was so honored to know your dad. His dad, Gil Kahele, used to stay at the house across the street from me, so I'd go out in the morning in my bathrobe to get my newspaper, and Gil would be coming out of John Buckstead's house, and we'd have little chats, me in my bathrobe, him ready to go off on his day. So he and I had some very nice talks when I was still getting up in the morning. I told him that since he had seen me in my bathrobe, he had to submit to interviews whenever I asked him, and he was very agreeable. Kai graduated from Hilo High. He went to Hawaii Community College and the University of Hawaii at Hilo. He got his bachelor's in education from UH Manoa. He's an accomplished civilian pilot. In fact, he just got back from China yesterday, flying for Hawaiian Airlines, and I hope he can stay awake with us tonight. He's also a decorated military pilot. He's an adjunct faculty member at UH Hilo, and he's involved with Pa'apono Miloli'i, working with Keiki and Miloli'i in South Kona. He and his wife Maria have 3 daughters, and he's in, as I said, the state senate, chair of the Committee on Higher Education, vice chair, Committee on Education, member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and member of the Committee on Housing. We are also honored to have Sherry Minor McNamara. She's president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. She used to work for the Hawaii State Legislature, ESPN's Sheraton Hawaii Bowl, Sony Corporation, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Estee Lauder, Elton John. You've had an awful lot of jobs, Sherry. We'll talk later about the Elton John Productions work. She worked for U.S. Senator Daniel Akaka and the Executive Office of the U.S. President. She serves on numerous boards and has been honored for her work. She is a fellow of the Omidyar Fellows Leadership Program, and she got her certificate in Expanding Impact and Advocacy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Executive Education. She has a bachelor's from UCLA and a JD and an MBA from the University of Hawaii. And finally, we have Lisa Miura, who is the Real Property Tax Administrator with County of Hawaii. So if you have any complaints about your property taxes after this forum, you know the girl to talk to. Lisa was born in Hilo, raised in Kona, lives in Waimea, and now works in Hilo most of the time, but she does spend a little time here at West Hawaii Civic Center. She graduated from Konawaina High. Her husband went to Waikea High. She has 3 children in public schools, and her father and mother-in-law are retired public school teachers in Hilo. Her family is very active in the community. Her husband has been the chair for the School Community Council and the local advisory panel. He's currently chair of the Parent-Teacher Association. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. What we are here to talk about tonight is the proposed amendment to the state constitution, which you see right there. Shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to be used to support public education? And before we hear from the panelists, I want you to know that if you go in to vote and you vote yes on this amendment, that means yes. If you vote no on this amendment, it means no. But if you get in there and don't vote at all, the state will count that as a no. So whether you want to vote yes or no, make sure you vote so it isn't just some arbitrary decision by the state that makes your decision for you. So what we'd like to do now is give each of the panelists around 10 minutes to tell us what they think. And we are going to start with Senator Kai Kahele. Senator Kahele.
Good evening, everyone. Aloha aihahi kako. We're supposed to say aloha. Let's try that again. Aloha. Perfect. Thank you for coming tonight. You know, I'm not going to take 10 minutes because I'd rather let the rest of my panelists talk this evening and then get to your questions. But I really appreciate you all taking the time to come out this evening. You know, it's very important. You know, it's difficult for me when I see 37% of Hawaii's voting electorate take part in a Hawaii state primary election in August. There's voter apathy out there. People are disenfranchised with their government. They're not happy with the legislature. They're not happy with government as a whole. And there is that civic sense of duty to participate in elections or vote, that your vote doesn't matter anymore. And that's a problem. It's a problem for our state. And so I'm really encouraged that you all took the time to come here this evening. It's why I took the time to drive all the way from Hilo to be with you here tonight and to answer those questions. My role in this forum is to maybe address some technical questions in regards to the state's budget, because I am a member of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. That's chaired by Senator De La Cruz, a very important committee in the Senate. It basically handles the state's entire just under $15 billion budget. So in terms of the education budget and what we allocate to the DOE, I can talk pretty accurately to that. The other component of tonight's panel discussion will be if the amendment passes, what's next? What role will the legislature play in the upcoming 2019 session to take the constitutional amendment question and turn it into a bill? And what will that bill look like as it moves to the legislature around the middle of January until we adjourn session in early May? And what role you, as the voting public, that should hold legislators like myself accountable, play in the evolution of that bill and how it moves to the legislature in both the Senate and the House chamber, and eventually gets to the governor's desk to be signed into law. I think that's it.
Thank
you, Sherry. Mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Corey Rosenlee, you're next. Would you like to sit up there or would you like to come down here? Okay. Corey Rosenlee, as I mentioned, is head of the Hawaii State Teachers Association, and that's the union that represents 13,500 teachers approximately.
Aloha. My name is Corey Rosenlee. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I'm the president of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. We represent 13,500 teachers across the state, including here in Kona. And I became a teacher like a lot of our teachers because we hold this value, that every child, regardless of their skin color, their ethnicity, how much their parents make, every child deserves a quality education. That they deserve the opportunity to have a good education and improve their lives. And the question is, how is Hawaii doing when it comes to that promise? Unfortunately, in many ways, we are failing. And that is why we've got to vote yes on this constitutional amendment and improve our education system. So how are we doing? First of all, just this past week, a study came out that ranked Hawaii as the worst place in the nation for teachers. And so what does that mean? Well, since 2010, we've seen the amount of teachers leaving Hawaii to move to the mainland increase by 84%. We just are not competitive in keeping our teachers here in Hawaii. So what this means is, for the first time in Hawaii's history, we now have over 1,000 classrooms that do not have a qualified teacher. And what do I mean by a qualified teacher? We either have emergency hires or we have substitutes filling in these classrooms. And these substitutes do not have to have the training for what they're teaching in the classroom. For example, there was a teacher that was teaching Spanish that did not know Spanish. There was a calculus teacher teaching calculus that did not know calculus. And for my own daughter, when she was at Ilima, for 2 years she had 4 long-term subs. One of them was for an entire semester in science because they could not find one 8th grade science teacher in the entire Oahu who would be able to educate her. We've gotten so desperate for teachers and substitutes that you no longer need a college degree in order to be a substitute, which basically means we have classrooms that are being taught by high school graduates teaching our students. By our estimates, 1/3 of all the children in Hawaii go to school on a daily basis and do not have a qualified teacher. 1/3, about 60,000 students. And so, how do we expect our children, if they have a substitute that doesn't know algebra, when they go to Algebra 2 to be able to understand it? And they don't. And so this is why Hawaii is 3rd worst in the nation, what's called the 9th grade to college pipeline. Either they drop out of high school, don't go to college, or drop out of college, because we are not preparing our students. When it comes to NAEP scores, the adjusted NAEP scores, we're actually last in the nation. And when it comes to special education in the state, we are breaking the law. We are short about 300 to 500 special education teachers. So there's no way we can provide what's called the individual education plan, which is required by federal law. And for those of you in this room that remember the Felix degree, the department at the time lost, and if they lose, they'll lose again, and we'll have to come up with billions of dollars in order to do what's federally required for our special education students. So, why is it this way? And the reality is we do not fund our schools well in Hawaii. When you adjust for cost of living, we're 45th in the nation on per pupil expenditure. We're last in teacher pay. So how do we compare? How do you know what the right amount is for how we should spend on our schools? There's 2 things you have to look at: comparative districts, and the only comparison we have in Hawaii is our private schools. So when you look at our comparative districts, we spend about $6,000 less per pupil than our competitive districts do. And that's why Oftentimes our teachers are leaving. Compared to our private schools, we spend about $10,000 to $20,000 less per pupil. So, the reality is we need to fund our schools. The only question is, how do we do it? In Hawaii, about 74% of people agree we need to increase funding for our public schools. The hard part is, how do we get from the place where we agree we need to fund our schools better, we agree that every child should have a quality education, how do we do it? And so we've been trying. There are only 4 buckets that are big enough to actually fund our schools. And I know a lot of people have a lot of ideas. We've looked at everything. But the 4 buckets are the general excise tax, the hotel tax, property tax, and the income tax. In the last 3 years, we've tried 3 of the 4. The first year, we tried a 1% increase in the GET. And the same people that are opposing this now, the property tax, were also against that. In the past, you tried the hotel tax and the property tax. Same groups came out against this. The reality is, they're going to come out against any way to increase funding for our public schools, which means that a no vote means the status quo. And we will continue to make sure that our schools are underfunded and that we do not provide our teachers or our students the schools they deserve. Now, you're going to hear a lot of things about what they're going to say, but this is what we're looking for. This is a 2-step process. The first thing is the constitutional amendment. That changes the Constitution. And our opponent is going to say it's vague. Why does it specifically say everything? Because all it does is change the Constitution. The next step will be the enabling language, what we put in next year. And we can put in every single thing that they're asking for. We are specifically going to put it in there, in the enabling language, second homes over $1 million. We will put in there that it goes dedicated through pre-K through 12. And they're going to say, well, it's not in there now. It's not in there now, vote no. Okay? But the problem is, that's not the way it works. The Constitution is supposed to be broad. The First Amendment to the Constitution does not give specifics of what is protected under freedom of speech. As one of my teachers said, the Constitution doesn't say where we put stop signs. If they want to make sure it's dedicated, if it's only second homes over $1 million, then they need to come with us next year and make sure that that's in the enabling language and fight with us. But I have a feeling no matter what's in there, they're going to still be against it. Because you have to look at who's funding their campaign. It is the wealthiest among us that do not want to pay any more taxes to fund our schools. And no matter what we try to do, they're going to be against it. So I want to look at my opponent's arguments, okay? And I consider they have 4 arguments that are against this. 1 is fear. 2, the DOE has plenty of money. 3, there's no guarantee. And 4, it's going to ruin the counties. So let's take the first one, fear. According to them, if this passes, all hell's going to break loose. Senator Kahele and all of his legislators are going to try to close businesses, tax the middle class, tax the poor, tax every single person until they ruin the economy. You can ask Senator Kahele if that's their intent, and it's not. Senator Kahele and the rest of the legislators like to get reelected. And the reason why they use this fear is because it works. Only less than 4% of the homes in Hawaii are second homes over $1 million. And so therefore, they cannot win with that 4%. The only way they're going to win is by scaring everyone else and scaring renters. I don't want to tax renters, no one does. That's never been proposed, that's never been what's been advocated for. It's second homes over $1 million is what we're looking at. Okay? Second argument, the DOE already has plenty of money, we don't need to increase revenue. And I mentioned before, okay, they'll say, this is the big word. The only solution they have to improve our schools is an audit. And they're going to say that over and over and over again. Go ahead. We got no problem with auditing the DOE. But even if the DOE was 100% efficient, we would still be 45th in the nation in per pupil expenditure. We would still spend $6,000 less than our competitive districts, and we would still spend $10,000 to $20,000 less than the private schools. And it's interesting, it always sort of irks me that when we spend $13,000 for a DOE student, that's wasteful. But $30,000 for a Punahou student is not. If we measure how much we spend per student and measure by the waste, then Punahou must be the most wasteful school. But the reality is that's what it costs. And in fact, in our public schools, we have to deal with the most difficult students. 53% of our students are economically disadvantaged. We have special education students that are extremely expensive. And every student we have to take into our schools. The next one they're going to say is this. What's the guarantee? Can you guarantee 100% that it's going to be dedicated to education? Can you guarantee 100% that it's going to only be second homes over $1 million? I can guarantee you this. If this dies and people vote no, there's a 100% guarantee we are not going to increase funding for public education. There are no guarantees for anything else. This is what we will advocate for, and this is what we will try to do. But if you want a 100% guarantee, you don't get that in life either. Last, they're going to argue it's going to hurt the counties, destroy the counties. It's going to ruin the bond rating. It's going to take away from fires and police departments. No, it's not. Because number one, this is a surcharge. It does not take away $1 away from the counties. And this is not a unique thing. 49 other states uses property taxes to fund their schools. 36 states have a state surcharge on property taxes. They've been able to work it out. We can work it out. It will not be this Armageddon that's going to occur. I want to point out here too. Okay, one last thing. Here in Kona, there's a development, Hulalei. They have over 300 properties in there. These last one, I think, sold for close to $20 million. At the same time, they did a study by Fortune. Only 6 of those people buying homes in there were local residents. Why can't we ask the wealthiest among us to pay not a more share, a fair share in order to educate our kids? And that's all we're asking for in order to be able to fund our schools and our keiki. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenly. Ms. Minor McNamara. Sherry Minor McNamara represents the State Chamber of Commerce, and whoever's got their phone on should turn it off, please. Oh, you need the handheld. Let me get it for you. Here you go. Try to keep it to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. Aloha and good evening, everyone. Wendy, you're right. Sherry, you're right. It's freezing in here.
That's why my jacket right there.
Yeah, exactly. As you read my bio, the one thing I was waiting to hear is to let the audience know that I'm actually from the Big Island. I'm from Hilo. And so my mom still lives there. She still has a small business. So I have roots here and certainly proud to be from Hilo. As to say, you can take the girl out of Hilo, but you can't take the Hilo out of the girl. I'm here representing the small business voice. The Chamber of Commerce represents over 2,000 members that employ more than 200,000 employees. And with that membership, 80% is small business with less than 20 employees. I'm a proud K-12 public school graduate, and my teachers meant a lot to me. And like everyone here, I strongly support public education. Therefore, we believe it's unfortunate that this ballot initiative is dividing our community, and many dedicated to public education has to take a position to oppose this Con-Am just because we feel that this will impact the community broadly. The constitutional amendment broadly reads, "Shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to support public education?" As such, we believe if this bill Con-Am passes, it will, 1, increase the cost of living. The Con-Am is so vague that it could apply to residential, commercial, agricultural properties, including the home you live in, regardless of value. From your private residence to rentals, from small mother and father businesses. This proposal includes all of them. If you purchased a condo or a home for your retirement, if you bought a condo for your kids to come home after college, or if you're renting a space at a shopping center to run your business, or if you just bought your first home hoping later to move up, these are all investment properties. The cost of goods and services will also go up as businesses face another tax increase. Proponents argue that teachers face the highest cost of living and that this is the worst place for teachers. Unfortunately, the cost of living is high for everyone here. and many also are facing the lowest salary issue. In fact, nurses also are being paid the lowest salary in the nation. Correctional officers even have the lowest paid, or at least the same average pay. Everyone faces the cost of living in our state, and many other professions have the lowest salaries in the nation. There are even other professionals moving to the mainland because of the cost of living, not only teachers. In fact, many millennials, according to Wallet Hub, are also moving out of the state as well. So do we want to continue to raise the cost of living for everyone? Proponents argue that it's only meant for $1 million plus non-occupied investment property. That's not what the constitutional amendment states. Nowhere in that CONAM does it specify the type and cost threshold of the property. Proponents want to raise $500 million in additional funding for public education. And taxing only investment properties that cost over $1 million will not generate $500 million. So the legislature will need to tax more types of properties. Also, the intent of the legislature could change each session. We don't know what the future looks like, but we know what history looks like. Recession, volatility in the market, fiscal challenges. So based on this, it's fair to say that when another economic recession hits, or when monies are needed, the passing of the constitutional amendment will provide an avenue for new taxes. Again, fact, nowhere on the ballot question does it say that it only applies to only investment property costing $1 million or more. Essentially, it provides a blank check to the legislature and a vehicle for more taxes for years to come. 2, the increase in the cost of doing business. Many small businesses lease or rent their locations. As such, this will add to the already high cost of doing business. And each year, businesses face an increase in costs, such as healthcare. Any new costs incurred by businesses will be passed along to the consumers, as we all know. And that, again, will increase the cost of living for everyone. Do we want to drive businesses out of businesses, which in turn will put people out of work? Many, many small businesses operate on a very slim profit margin. Proponents argue that this will not hurt and is not meant for small businesses. Again, the CONAM does not exclude commercial property. 3, no guarantee it will provide additional funding to public education. Who's to say that if this passes, monies raised from this tax will provide additional funding to the DOE, Department of Education? The legislature could reduce the existing education budget and replace it with new funds. So again, there's no guarantee that additional monies will go towards public education. We don't need this kind of uncertainty, especially given the fact that 25% of the current state budget, which is derived from the general excise taxes we already pay, is allocated for the DOE. We believe an independent fiscal audit and fiscal transparency are needed. Hawaii is the only state that doesn't conduct an independent audit. And by the way, for the past 10 years, bills were introduced, approximately 15 of them, to audit DOD. None were passed. In any business, we are forced to budget and plan the future. We only ask that the DOE open its books and disclose how the budget is allocated and why the DOE needs more than 25% of the budget. Where are the inefficiencies so that monies can be reallocated to where they are really needed? Why is it that per pupil spending is on average higher in one of the highest in the nation, yet the money isn't going to the classrooms? How do you have a $2 billion budget, operating budget, and classrooms are ill-equipped? Where is the money going? Where are the inefficiencies so that monies can be reallocated to where it's really needed. Approving an additional tax without this critical disclosure is just a bad decision. Proponents argue that funds are needed to hire qualified teachers. Well, according to the DOE website, 94% of positions are actually filled by qualified teachers. And each year, 86% of the special education positions are filled each year. And there are 1,000 open teacher positions, is less than the annual attrition rate. Proponents also argue that the CONAM should be vague, or supposed to be vague. Well, that's the scary part. That provides an opportunity to give the legislature broad authority, a vehicle, and a blank check for years to come. We don't use fear, but facts. In conclusion, do we want Hawaii to continue to be the state with the highest cost of living in the nation? Do we want to continue to add an unnecessary bureaucracy to the Department of Education? Do we want to continue to be in the dark about how DOE allocates its money? Do we want to continue to allow the legislature to collect more taxes from us? I believe the answer is no, absolutely not. Voting no is not a vote against public education or against investing in our keiki. Voting no is to save us from a knee-jerk decision that is not supported by sound logic and a thorough audit of current use of available DOE resources. So we humbly ask you to vote no on the constitutional amendment, and let's work together to find a better plan to improve our public education system. Mahalo.
Thank you, Sherry. And now Lisa Miura from Hawaii County, the Real Property Tax Administrator, will share her thoughts again after the forum is over if you want to talk about your own property taxes. She loves to talk about property taxes. Thank you, Lisa.
I do. I love property taxes. I think some of you are going to be nervous. You're going to see, looks like I have a whole pamphlet here to talk about. And I promise you, it's just to keep me on task because Sherry will come up at that 9.5 minutes to get me to stop talking. I'm very grateful to be here this evening to talk to you, and I'm impressed there's this many people that have taken time out of their Wednesday night to come and listen to the ballot measure. I wish there was more people who are interested in voting and knowing what those ballots were about. I've always gone to vote in the past, and I understand my friends and people in this generation that they get there and they say they don't vote because they don't know what it's about. And you got to educate yourselves, and this bill is on public education, so I thank you for being here this evening. I'm only here to share the facts of how this ballot is going to impact the taxes on this island and our county. There's going to be a lot of different opinions of how it affects each county, but I'm here to just represent what it's going to do to our taxes. Mayor Kim is a retired teacher. He is currently our mayor. And then we have Willow Kabe, who is the former HSTA president. I've also lived on the mainland, and I've worked for a county jurisdiction that did collect property taxes. So I'm here to share a little bit of what I learned over there to bring it back home. Reading the words on the ballot, it doesn't tell you the effect this will have. The wording doesn't even state it's taxes. It's called a surcharge. It doesn't state that it's going to be your county taxes that are going to be affected. It doesn't state teachers or kids. I understand some ballot measures need to be vague. I get it that sometimes we have ballots that are so long, by the end of it, you don't even know what it's talking about. I think this one is a little bit short, and so that's why we're here tonight, because people don't know what they're voting on. The first fact is the words over $1 million and residential investment was on a bill in 2017 that the legislature did not approve. It was removed from the bill, and the current bill is currently up front outside if you need to get a hold of it. I don't want people to think I'm here to do scare tactics. It's the truth, and if for some people it's scary, that's not my problem. The second fact is there's nothing stating that the money will get to the teachers or kids. And if I was a teacher who is always encouraged to wear red, you should be extremely livid about this fact. That wasn't the county who took that out. Let me clarify that. There is nothing guaranteed that this will ever get to the DOE, let alone pass beyond the DOE administration raises that are already in the works. That was just in our newspaper yesterday. The third fact is the DOE, this does affect, all of us, even if we live in a $300,000 home. Don't buy it that it doesn't affect us if it's just going to be for people that own a second home over $1 million. As the tax administrator, I do get really fussy when I hear how this will benefit us as homeowners because I can't see any facts to truly support that. Even if the legislature were to set up rules to only go after the so-called rich that don't live here, this does not equate to more affordable island for us, although we are the most affordable of all the islands. You cannot separate one tax category and assume it has nothing to do with the others. Our island alone has 67.5% of all parcels are owned by somebody who lives on this island. So what does that mean? That means they have a homeowner's exemption on their main property, and they probably have a second property. This isn't all mainland people that you're never going to see. These are people in your community. These are people renting their homes out. And I'm not with the businesses, I'm not representing any group, and I'm not here to tell you how to vote. I'm just here to share with you the facts. What does an increase of $1 million to just the property residential class mean? And there is some confusion because in other counties, there is no different classification for homeowners versus residential. And to me, that's one of the fundamental problems with how this bill or this ballot was come up with, because they were very Oahu-centric when they looked at it. But you know what? Neighbor islands need to stick together, and we got to get out and vote. Otherwise, the people on Oahu are going to make this decision for us. $1 million. If the legislature approves the $500 million, and I honestly do not think they have the appetite for that either. I've heard a senator already quoted on it. But that's the ask, right? So if you're going to come in and ask for $500 million, I need to figure out what that $500 million looks like to us. At this county, 15% of $500 million, that's what we're responsible for, 15%. It is a surcharge. So the surcharge and what the claimant is stating is that it's not going to affect you because it's an additional amount onto your taxes. So it's not taking away from the county. You don't think $75 million having to come from real property taxes, even if it's a surcharge, isn't going to affect people on this island? Our county council could barely agree on $5 million. We had to go in and do the little 0.25% GE tax with a sunset. And that was the hugest beef ever. And if you're bored enough, I'm sure there's some council video that replays still at night. All the legislature does for the $500 million, that would be a $12,100 increase. How many properties are in that residential class that's non-homeowners over $1 million? On this island, there's only 1,440. So to spread out that $75 million ask, each of those need to pay an additional $12,000. And it sounds great. Oh, they must all be mainland people. They're not. 32% of those live here. What if you just have $500,000? Because let's say the ledge can't pass it. And I think they took it out of the bill because they know you'd have to charge so much money to get that through. They're not going to have the appetite for it. That increase, if they spread it amongst all the classes except the homeowners, and that's what we're hoping. We're hoping at least with the wording on this bill, it doesn't apply to homeowners. They would need to increase it by $3,125 for that parcel. What about if they just went to $200 million? HSTA came back later and said, oh, well, maybe $200 to $400 million. We don't need $500 million. What $200 million, that increase would be $625. This is Kona. How many properties are worth more than $500,000 that we live in? I had a house in Kona. It wasn't worth that much, but I can tell you what, everybody else in the neighborhood, the values are going up. It's not hard to hit $500,000. I live in Waimea. There's hardly anything less than $500,000 in Waimea. If you have a $170,000 lot, that's going to be in the residential class. That lot is going to go up between $212.50 to $531.25 per year. That doesn't sound like it's bank breaking. But if you have a vacant lot that you're saving for your kids, or you're hoping your mo'opuna move back after they go to college because it's so hard to make it here, how are you going to continue to pay the taxes? Most of the properties we see at tax sale are vacant land because people can't afford it. The legislature hasn't figured it out yet, but here's another fact. There is no cap or maximum that they can set for this. So that means they didn't set the max they can take or the max surcharge that they can ask for. And I want to trust the legislature. I think Gil's son is a great guy. He's the legislature today. What happens to the legislature in 3 or 4 years when they forgot what the happy intent was today? What happens to the legislature in 10 or 15 years? As it was brought up before, we have the TAT. If we got what we were supposed to get from the TAT, we would be getting $41 million to this county right now. We get $19 million. The fourth fact is supplanting. And this is a really rough one, and it took me some time to wrap around it. I'm local. My grammar isn't the greatest, but I'm going to tell it to you like it is. This one is really bothersome because as voters, we think this is the additional money that the teachers and kids are going to get, because that's all I hear from HSTA. That's all the teachers keep thinking. That's all I keep being told. There is nothing guaranteeing that the legislature won't one day say, great, thanks counties, I got the $500 million from you, so we're going to just continue to add that on. There's nothing stating that they can't lower the amount that they put into it now by that amount, so now they only have to put up $2.4 billion to the teachers or to the DOE. They can use it the supplanting. And an easier way, because I had to explain it to some of my staff, is let's say I give my kid $10 for doing her chores. And my mom comes along and gives my kid $10. And she thinks, great, I got 20 bucks. I can go and buy a burger or an acai bowl or a smoothie, whatever they drink today. And I just come along and say, oh, good, you got your 10 bucks, so you're good. You don't get any more money. That's supplanting. It's not in addition to, it's in place of. The fifth fact is the legislature convenes on Oahu. And yes, we do have representatives on this island. I think we only have one in this room, and he's the one presenting. Your county government is on this island, and when you want to give testimony in person, you can go to one of 6 video conferencing sites on this island. Ka'u, Puna, Hilo, Waimea, North Kohala, and Kona. When you get your tax bill now, you can call our office, you can walk in, you can scream at us, you can yell, yep, I see Sherry. And people ask me all the time, where's that money going? We have our budgets, the drafts, the finals, everything's online. You can go, you can watch the county council meetings, you can voice your concern. Who is going to answer the phone about where the DOE is spending this money? Is it going to be HSTA? Are they going to put their phone number on the bills? Is it going to be the legislature? I could go on, but I will end with this. I've been told, again, that my fact-finding is just scare tactics. Call it what you want. But please be leery of feel-good measures that don't deliver, especially in an election year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miura. And finally, we're going to hear from Tom Yamachika. As I mentioned, if you read West Hawaii Today, and aren't you in the Advertiser as well? I don't know, I see your writings here and there, but he writes about tax matters and he knows about tax matters. The Tax Foundation has been around for a long time. His predecessor, Lowell Kalapa,
yeah.
Would come to this island from time to time, and their mission has been this mission for many, many years. So thank you, Tom, so much for coming over for this.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I wanted to do is, oh, you have a clicker for me. I wanted to give you some points to ponder about what this Con-Am measure does and what it doesn't do. Okay. And the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention is, what is this measure about? Okay. The one thing that this constitutional amendment does, it's about tax. It gives the state new taxing power. Okay. Real property tax has been the exclusive kuleana of the counties for the last 40 years. This amendment will change that. Is the Con-Am about kids? Maybe, maybe not. The surcharge collects, some amount of money 200, 400 million, 500 million to fund public education, but says nothing about the $2 billion of general fund money that is going to the Department of Education now. So the reality, I think, is going to be that if the Con-Am passes, some of the existing $2 million could get repurposed, namely moved to somewhere else. Now, I'm sure Corey will fight as hard as he can to make sure it doesn't happen, but people like Senator Kahele are going to be under intense pressure, right? What are we going to do about the homeless? What are we going to do about invasive species? What are we going to do about all these poor people who are really down on their luck because of the rotten economy and need to get a fresh start? Okay, there are all these things that need help, even within the rubric of public education, right? You heard just a couple of weeks ago, UH has this huge funding need because they have dilapidated buildings, facilities, and so forth. They're going to ask the legislature for $600 million this session. UH is in the same constitutional article that is being amended by this Con-Am. So public education is going to refer not only to K-12, but it can also refer to UH, it can also refer to the community college system, it can also refer to the libraries, because those are under the same constitutional article that is affected by this. Who's going to get hit? Okay. When you think about who's going to get hit, can we make this tax provision in the year after this is enacted? Like, the constitutional amendment will not execute itself. It needs laws to be passed to actually impose the tax. Okay, what are the constraints on those laws? Can you make it so that only foreigners get impacted because they're turning our market? Or so the argument goes. Or can you only target out-of-state people? And the answer is no, because we have something called the U.S. Constitution. And the U.S. Constitution says only the feds can regulate commerce between the states. Only the feds can regulate commerce between the nations, so states can't do it. A state tax law cannot discriminate by nationality. We already know that we can't discriminate by race. We also can't discriminate by residency because only the feds can do that. Okay, so who's going to get hit? We don't know, but one thing that I can tell you is that if you are talking about investment property, which is what this constitutional amendment addresses, you show me a renter, and I'll show you investment property. Because that's who the renter is renting from. And then there's the Me Too factor. Teachers get a raise? Me too. Give a union a shaka. Our union, our family. These are all part of DOE, by the way. UH Professional Assembly. We're supporting public education too, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, these, again, are going to be additional pressures that are going to be put on our legislators, such as Senator Kahele. If a new funding source comes in, what is going to be done with that money, number one, and number two, with the existing $2 billion that is now going to DOE. Lot of pressure, lot of pressure. I do not envy his job. I wouldn't want it. So ultimately, the question that is going to be presented to you as voters is, should we give the legislature more taxing power? Now, one thing you have to understand is that the state already has plenary taxing power. What that means is that it can tax anything, okay, within the limits of constitutional law. You can't discriminate, but you can tax anything. Okay, so right now we have tax on lots of stuff. We have the big taxes, we have the sin taxes, we have fuel taxes, we have, pardon me? We have rail. Well, rail's a county thing, but That's it already has plenary power except for real property tax. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, the legislature hasn't solved this problem with the plenary power it already has. What's going to happen if we give it more? Okay. Obviously, there are lots of variables, but those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. Those are the questions we should be asking our elected officials. And those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves once we go into the ballot box and figure out whether we're going to vote a yes or no for this amendment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I really appreciate them sharing their thoughts so that we can sort of get a grounding. And again, if you have specific questions, let us know. We have already, as I mentioned, had several questions submitted. And I want to turn first to, I also want to mention, I think everybody in this room is for improving our education system. I can't imagine there's, maybe there's one person or two people in the entire state who don't think improving our public education system, especially K through 12, is a good thing. And what we really need to think about tonight is this constitutional amendment, as written, the right way to do it? So for Senator Kai Kahele, typically when the state legislature, you just pull that towards you, and Mr. Scott Ordway here manages the sound. You're going to have to talk into the microphones pretty close. Anyway, typically when any organization has a problem, they figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve, what's the solution, and how much money will the solution cost. So in the discussions in the state legislature, as you guys decided about making this a constitutional amendment, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What are the solutions? What's the cost?
Well, the problem is improving public education in Hawaii, like Corey talked about. If we want to provide, let's take preschool, for example. We have maybe 25 or so preschool pilot projects across the state. It's a proven fact that starting education at a young age, at 2 years old, at 3 years old, at 4 years old, at 5 years old, is extremely important to the overall development of a young child. But the majority of Hawaii's and largely underprivileged, lower income children do not get that opportunity to go to preschool because preschool costs money. So that's one thing. If we want to pay for universal preschool across the state, we need to raise the funds to do that. If we want to pay our teachers more, raise the weighted student formula that gets allocated to our schools. Right now, $57,000 across the board is the base number that gets allocated to the 290 or so DOE schools across the state. Teacher retention, funding more special education, like Corey had talked about, and meeting that federal mandate. Those things cost money. And this is a broader question we need to have as a community, is how do we improve the state's public education system? It's extremely important. We all know that improving our public educational system builds healthy communities, allows families to thrive, gives kids a better start in life, and it's an investment that we need to make. And right now, the state has a lot of obligations, like Tom talked about. There's a lot of different things to choose from, and it's difficult with the budget that we have. And so, as legislators, those are the things we struggle with, because our state has a lot of issues that we need to discuss, and education is one of them.
The state has about, you mentioned a $15 billion budget, 14 billion, 15 billion, somewhere in there. The State Department of Education today gets about $2 billion. And the question for you, Senator Kahele, is if the amendment is voted in, how much money do you expect to raise with this that would theoretically be allocated to education?
Well, the Department of Education does get about $2 billion in total funds. That includes federal funding that comes from the federal government, primarily Title I schools. It includes special funds. It includes various sorts of funding. I do have that breakdown in a slide that might be helpful to answer that question for the audience to see, just to see where your taxpayer dollars are coming from and where they're coming from. Corey articulated it perfectly, right? We have the general excise tax, we have income tax, we have the transit and accommodation tax. Those are your three big buckets that the state manages.
And they all go into the general fund,
They all go
yes?
into the general fund.
Okay.
And then you have the property tax. Everything else is a distant third in terms of money that the state generates to provide the core services for the state of Hawaii.
So
I know the property tax is the bread and butter for the county of Hawaii and the various counties, but the state is a major player here on Hawaii Island. What do you think funds our public hospitals, our highways, our state parks, our educational system, lower and higher? We can go on and on of the state's role to the various counties.
Right, so the
And
question was, how much money do you think needs to be raised? What was the
300
legislature
million.
thinking? 300 million?
Yeah, I think the DOE could use and should use somewhere between 250 to 300 million. And sure, we can allocate that from the general fund, but it's going to come from somewhere. And the next biggest pot besides education is human services, is healthcare, is Medicaid. So we're going to cut from other areas to fund education, unless we raise revenues. How are we going to raise revenues? We're maxed out on tourism, the #1 income generator for the state. We're at 10 million tourists already. Unless we start attracting higher income tourists, it's going to be pretty difficult we're already maxed out. Our parks are maxed out, our accommodations are maxed out. There's not very many other sources to raise revenue unless we want to have difficult conversations that the legislature and the general community has not wanted to address.
Okay, so you said 300 million, and I've heard 300 to 500 million, but let's stick with 300 million. I do want to mention that we might as well have an empty chair here. We would like to know, and maybe you have information from Department of Education, but the question that we would like to ask Department of Education is, what would they do if they were to get all or part of $300 million? We did invite Department of Education to the Hilo Forum, to this forum, and they were invited to Waimea Forum tomorrow. They have either declined or just not responded, and I asked them in an email last week, at the beginning of last week, we don't need you to take a position on this amendment, and if you can't come to any of the forums, just tell me in an email, where do you think your areas in Department of Education, where do you think the areas of greatest need are? Where would you likely spend the money? And they are not yet willing to answer that question. I've been told that they do intend at some point to put out a statement, but what do you know, Senator Kehale? What have they told you about what they might spend the money on if, in fact, the Department of Education has communicated this?
So I'll just make one correction to what Lisa said earlier, because this bill didn't change in 2017. This bill changed in March of 2018. The Senate bill that passed the Education Committee and that passed the Judiciary Committee was very specific in its scope. It talked about residential investment properties, where the homeowner did not claim an exemption that was valued at $1 million or more. It also talked about visitor accommodations that, of course, the visitor industry opposed. And it was very specific in what those resources would be used for. Some of them were teacher retention, preschools, and special education. I sit on Ways and Means, I sit on Education, I voted for that bill. That thing went over to the House. The bill changed in the House. In the House Education Committee, they dramatically changed the bill. They took out everything the Senate had, much more tighter in scope, and that is what we voted on. Now, we did pass that bill, and so I can't, I would have much rather have the Senate version of the bill. I don't think Corey would disagree. This was something the legislature attempted to do in 2017. We couldn't get it done then. We tried again this year, and that's where the bill laid. But where it would go for would be, I would like it to be specific. I'd like to see preschools all across our state. I'd like to see investment in special education. I'd like to see us increase the weighted student formula. I'd like to see us invest in capital improvement projects so we can cool every school in this state, so we can rebuild schools. We have declining infrastructure. You want to talk $600 million at the University of Hawaii? The DOE is in need of just as much money to replace our aging schools. So that's what the money should go for. It shouldn't go for administrative salaries or for waste fraud and abuse, it should go specifically for certain categories. That's what I supported, and that's what I support. And that's what I'll champion if this bill makes it to the legislature in 2019.
Well, that's a good thing that you'll champion it. I think the problem that people have, and I've got a few questions here that are more or less the same, you know, this is a very, very vague statement, and if you look at the underlying legislation as it exists today, it does not say all the things that Mr. Rosenlee and that you are saying would be nice to be in there, taxing second homes owned by mainland investors worth over $1 million. And it's not that we don't trust the state legislature, but our history with the state legislature is that the transient accommodation tax is a perfect example, and as Ms. Mira, I believe, mentioned, the transient accommodation tax was initially set up to provide the counties with some financial relief for the impact of visitors. And if the state legislature had kept the same program, the same plan as initially promised, this county would be getting $41 to $44 million at this point. And the last legislative session, which I believe you were part of, you all capped it in perpetuity at $19.1 million. So we're just trying to figure out how this vague amendment with pretty vague underlying legislation is going to translate to our tax situation and to getting the money where you say it should go.
I cannot agree with you more on the TAT. I voted no 4 times on that bill. I even voted no on second reading. I did not approve of the cap. I did not approve of the allocation. I did not approve of raising the TAT to pay for rail on another island. We do deserve and should get $44 million or more. The state currently gets the lion's share of the transient accommodation tax, and that's what it was not meant to be when they established it in the late 1980s and early 1990s. You know, that's been something we've tried to address every year. But, you know, we can argue all day on the vagueness of the question. I'm not going to disagree. The question is very vague. You know, I think we all agree we need to fund public education. We might disagree on how to do it. It is a vague question. It is a Con-Am question, right? Because in the Constitution, in the 1978 Con-Con, that's when the state gave the counties, through the Con-Con, the power to tax real property. Believe it or not, they delayed the implementation of that constitutional amendment in 1978 for 11 years, thinking that they would repeal it if they had a Con-Con in 1988. Didn't happen. And so the counties have only been collecting property taxes since about 1988, 1989. Before that, the state allocated through grants appropriations to the counties. So this is something the counties have been doing for about 30 years now.
By the way, even though a lot of these questions are directed to you, if you other folks have comments, I'm certainly, we'd like to hear your thoughts. Senator Cahaly, and actually everybody up here, the term fund or to support public education, in the initial legislation, there was a little bit more specificity, but the Constitution talks about public education as University of Hawaii, community colleges, K through 12 schools, Department of Education headquarters, the Office of Hawaiian Language Education, Hawaiian Language Immersion Schools, charter schools, preschools, and the underlying legislation also references the possibility of giving funds to private institutions in some cases. So what do we know about how, if we raised $300 million, how it might actually be allocated? Because Senator Cahaly, you did mention a number of things, but where would the money go? Because there's just so many possibilities. Libraries, I forgot libraries, you even mentioned that. Where's the money going to go?
I can't speak for my other colleagues at the legislature. I can tell you what my intent and purpose and what I would champion, and that would be specifically for the Department of Education in those most critical, important categories that are in desperate need of funding.
Well, let me add to that if I could. Civil Beat did a story a couple of days ago where the reporter interviewed Justin Woodson, who was the House Education Chair, and he was quoted as saying that the vagueness of this language was intentional, that they wanted specifically to make it as broad as possible to give themselves maximum flexibility for fashioning the implementing legislation later. Okay, so it's vague on purpose, and I'm not sure if I don't know how much responsibility Senator Kahele had over that, but basically the choice that he was given at the end of last session was, okay, this is not going to go to conference, so either you pass the Woodson version or this bill dies. And they decided to pass it, and that's what they did.
Well, technically, when we received the bill from the House, we disagreed to the House's version, the House Draft 1. And they were so that was going to send the bill to conference where they would negotiate the bill. However, after further conversations, it was determined that we should adopt the House version of the bill, otherwise the bill might fail altogether, which is what happened in 2017. And so that's basically why the bill moved forward, in that version from the House.
And if I could answer too. And I think Senator Kahele makes a really good point. The previous language said specifically $1 million. It said specifically where it was going to go. That's exactly what we wanted. That's the bill we put up forward. And I think something you mentioned before is everyone agrees in improving education. And I think we all do. And I think that one of the things I really appreciate, even for all of you being here, is that we're having a great conversation about education. And for too long, that's something that we haven't discussed. And I'm afraid that if we vote no, what's going to happen is the conversation stops. If we say yes, what it does is we can go into the legislature with exactly, I think, the things that many of us agree upon. The one thing we talked about is we don't want it to be supplanted. Then let's put in language to make sure it's not supplanted. Let's say specifically where it's going to go. And I think that that is the things that we can agree upon and still continue to move the conversation forward. The sad part is that we would have loved the perfect language. And at the end of the day, we're really trying to push hard to improve education. We can still do that. It doesn't die, and I appreciate the courage of Senator Kahele and others, those that really are fighting hard for education in the legislature. And most of the legislators would agree exactly with what we just said. Those are the values that they have. And I still believe that we can still do those things.
Senator Kahele, the way the legislature would write legislation, would it specifically say how the monies would be allocated? Or would that be up to other institutions such as Department of Education or outside entities, nonprofits that might run preschools, or how would that work?
Well, if the CONAM passes, then I would envision both House and Senate chambers will start drafting a bill. Senator Kidani, who chairs the Education Committee, Representative Woodson, who currently chairs the Education Committee, would probably draft their separate versions of the bill in coordination with the two most important people in the building, which would be Senator Dela Cruz, the Ways and Means Chairman, and Representative Luke, Chair of the House Finance Committee. Nothing goes through without their seal of approval. And they're really the subject matter experts on the state's budget. And they have a staff of 20 that helps educate them on the state's budget. So you would see competing versions of a draft bill that would be introduced in early January when the legislature convenes. And then it would go through the legislative process where the public will have an opportunity to submit testimony, weigh in on the different versions of the bill.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to that is that on this particular bill, I mean, Senator Kahele kind of pointed out that tax bills usually go through the money committees, which are House Finance and Senate Ways and Means. This one did not. Okay, it specifically bypassed both committees, and was passed by I think Senate Education and Judiciary, and then House Education. Period. That's all. I know this was brought up as an issue when the counties challenged this particular ballot measure, but nothing came of that.
One of the reasons for that, and I got to look at the bill just real quick, but because the bill had no fiscal impact to the state, it purposely did not go through the Senate Ways and Means Committee and that's Senator De La Cruz's policy, that if the bill doesn't actually have a line item in there with a fiscal impact and appropriation, that he waives off. And so it was important to go to the Education Committee. Because it is a constitutional amendment, it has to go to the Judiciary Committee.
But when you say no fiscal impact to the state, meaning the only fiscal impact would be to those people who are paying property taxes, is that correct?
Well, no, what I mean is it doesn't have an actual line on the bill with a dollar amount, with an actual figure. You know, you'll see bills that have, at the end of the bill, it'll have an appropriation amount. That's an appropriation bill. It would go to the Ways and Means Committee. In this case, it did not. It went to two committees in the Senate,
wait a
one
minute.
committee in the House.
But plenty of tax bills don't have dollar amounts attached to them. They don't appropriate any money, but they just raise money, and they go through the money committees all the time.
But so this would have, I'm sure the enabling language would have to go through Ways and Means, and would have to go through Finance, because again, all this does is create the change to the Constitution that allows the opportunity for the enabling language. And the enabling language would have to go through Ways and Means.
No, there's no
Finance.
question. The
Yeah,
2019 bill would go through Ways and Means, but this bill did not.
Yeah.
It could have, and typically on the House side, everything goes through House Finance.
So my question, I think, was, will the enabling legislation actually specify where exactly the money would go?
I think
Absolutely.
I think there would be very specific provisions inside of it. I mean, we had it
Meaning-
before.
And
Okay.
okay, and then,
But it's all speculation at this point.
right,
It
and
is.
that's,
Yeah.
like I said, it's not that I don't trust Senator Kehele and his colleagues, but sadly, history indicates that things that are vague sort of end up that way. But
Sure.
Ms. Menor-McNamara, you stated that the Chamber of Commerce, the state chamber, believes that this will raise the cost of living in the state. Help us understand why you believe that.
Well, I just wanted to remind the audience.
And please speak into your
Oh,
microphone.
Can you hear me? Okay, just remind the audience that once a constitutional amendment is placed, it is very hard to undo. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it provides a vehicle, a blank check for not only next session, so what they're talking about may be the intent of the legislature next session, but what about the following session and the session after that? And what if the economy doesn't get any, what if we get a recession, as I mentioned? You know, so I think we need to look at this broader picture and long-term, that the Con-Am, if it passes, it's in place, and it will be in place for a long time, and that will allow the legislature to enact legislation to add more taxes. So again, what they're talking about maybe next session, and if they're talking about that specific proposal, but yet they're looking at a $300 to $500 million, that's not going to meet that requirement. And I think Lisa can elaborate that more. As it relates to us mentioning that's going to increase the cost of living, increase the cost of doing business, and that there's no guarantee the money will go towards public education. I guess, can we remember an instance where we authorized the state to tax us and they decided not to? I don't think so. I think TAT, barrel tax, and other type of taxes. But if this Con-Am passes, again, it will provide a vehicle and a blank check to increase our taxes. And it will also give the flexibility to increase taxes. Also, and again, Lisa can probably explain further, it will affect the bond rating. And if it affects the bond rating, it will cost more to borrow. And that will probably have indirect impacts in placing it onto the taxpayers.
Okay, so the answer to the question of how will this increase the cost of living is you're saying because we will have higher property taxes and because it might lower the bond rating of the counties?
Absolutely. So let's say, because it's not defined, there's that flex, right? The Con-Am does not specify if it's residential, commercial, or agriculture. It does not specify a threshold. So again, it has that flexibility for each legislative session to introduce proposals that would add taxes to these various types of properties, which in turn, obviously, will be passed on to consumers, because the cost of goods, cost of doing business will go up, cost of living, rents will increase, your homes, the taxes will go up. So there's this, the unknown of passing a constitutional amendment that is so vague that when we look to the future, anything could happen.
Let me ask a question. Investment real property. What is the definition of investment real property? What properties would be taxed?
There is no definition. And that's why this is vague, and that's why it could impact, again, residential, commercial, ag. It does not specify in the constitutional amendment that the voters have to vote on.
Ms. Miura, is there a definition in Hawaii County of investment real property that you can share with us?
There isn't. Oops, let me get up higher. Sorry, there isn't a definition in the Hawaii County. However, in talking to our corporation counsel on how we would have to view it, it would be viewed as everything that is not the homeowners class. And we're hopeful there because we've already heard from attorneys on the outside who've called us and said, well, that's not true. When you talk to homeowners, they buy their property, they expect it to be an investment. They don't expect to lose money. So where are you getting that term from? So we're hopeful that it will exclude the homeowners at minimum.
Senator Kahele, your input, please. How do you think the legislature might define investment real property?
Well, we did in the original version of the bill. Residential investment property on page 5 means basically all buildings, structures, including apartments and condos that is dedicated for residential use and for which the owner does not qualify for a homeowner's exemption. So basically, residential investment properties, if you don't get a homeowner's exemption, typically you're out of state or you're a foreign investor, that's the definition that we defined in the Senate version of the bill, is residential investment property.
But that's not
That
the version
means
of the bill
nothing.
that passed.
That means nothing because it's not in the bill.
That's right.
So
Okay.
I'm just telling you how we tried to define it in the Senate. I will not vote for any bill that does not meet these requirements. And I can't speak for the other 24 senators in that chamber, but there's a lot of them that are philosophically aligned with the same values that I have, and you will not see a bill that will tax your residential homes. I know that's, you're asking to place your trust in the legislature, and we have a very difficult time earning your trust and keeping your trust, but that's not something I would support
And
on
I
this
don't-
island.
and-
Adamantly opposed.
And no legislator we talk to would. And that's hard. I mean, no one trusts legislators, and so there is that fear. But we have these conversations. And I think that, what Sherry and what you guys brought up before, no one talked about wanting to close small businesses or tax agricultural lands. And there is a certain trust that comes with legislators, but this is the democratic process. I'm a social studies teacher. It's us to hold our legislators accountable and to vote for them. And, it wasn't easy to get this through, but I'll tell you, if we were to try to go after residential property or agricultural or commercial businesses, there's no desire to do that. And the reason why our opponents bring it up is because it's so unpopular. It's not like legislators are suicidal and want to upset everyone in their constituencies, and that's just not the way it is.
That will not pass the Senate.
It
You
wouldn't,
guys
nor the
keep
House.
saying residential, you don't want to tax residential, but you said that is part of it, buildings, apartment complexes, condos,
Yeah, we
our
can
low-income
create
properties,
exemptions for
our
that.
apartment, they don't get an exemption for that.
But we
And
did.
they're over $1
Actually,
million.
if you looked at the bill 2 years ago, we did create an exemption for that, and that's exactly what we put in, because we don't want to do that.
Well,
I mean-
I'd like to point out that Senator Kahele said properties that do not qualify for a homeowner's exemption, and sort of by definition, an apartment building would not qualify, as I understand it, for a homeowner's exemption. The initial bill said, which is not the bill that is currently under discussion, the bill that did not pass, said in residential investment property. So it sounds to me like if I'm renting my home from somebody, that would qualify. And actually, one of the questions that came in is from a local attorney who is in private practice, didn't work for a big firm, says he does not have a retirement account. So he started early on. He's been an attorney for 45 years here. He said early on he started buying homes, residential homes, to rent out and use as his retirement. And that's what he is doing. So he's concerned because, as he says, as he interprets this, every single one of the homes, except for the one in which he lives, would be taxed additionally under this. Are you in some way planning to exempt local residents from these taxes and only tax people who do not live either on this island or in the state? Corey, you've said that numerous times, that
No,
you're only going to apply.
you can't do that, and Tom would agree. He's absolutely right. You cannot tax just foreign owners. New Zealand did it.
But you do understand that your public relations stuff that goes out all says that you're only intending this tax to be on wealthy foreign investors, which sort of makes people think it's wealthy foreign investors.
So we absolutely do plan on, and look, you can't claim poverty if you're owning 2 homes over $1 million.
There's nothing in here about
okay.
$1 million. You got that right?
I understand.
Okay, just checking.
Okay, and the thing is this, we love to have it, we put it in there. And so the question you have to ask is, this is what was presented. Would we love to say, if you go look at the origin of the bill we put forward, it said specifically what it was going to go for. It said residential property over $1 million. And that's exactly what we'll fight for. But right now, about 3.78% of homes in Hawaii are second homes over $1 million. And of that, we estimate about 1% are actually owned by local residents. So there will be some local residents that will have to pay it. That's how you have to be constitutional. But again, this normally is this. If we have to raise funding for education, you want to do it in a progressive manner. So that the idea is that those that can afford to have the ability to pay will be able to contribute it. And right now in Hawaii, actually the poor actually pay more as a percentage of their income than the rich do. So this is trying to create, we're not asking them to pay more, we're asking them to pay a fair share. And you mentioned something before, and I want to stick to that. If we agree that everyone believes we should improve education, then how do we do it? Where do we get the additional revenue? And should it come from the poor or should it come from the wealthy?
Well, that presupposes that you need additional revenue. I mean, if there is, in fact, waste or abuse within the system, and you find it, you can deploy it to better or wiser uses without raising taxes. Isn't that a possibility?
But how much do you think would be raised by that? Do you think you're going to find hundreds of millions of dollars of waste?
Some people have said that, yeah, 10%.
In a $2 billion budget, possibly there is. I'm talking about the State Department of Education budget. But again, there's no guarantee this would go to the State Department of Education completely, as far as I understand what you all are saying. Mr. Rosenlee, you have used the term wealthy, and I'm wondering if there is a definition of wealthy and whether you might be now asking for people's financial statements, because a lot of people don't have, if they're wealthy, they may not have a high-paying job, but they may have investments. So is the state planning on asking, is the county planning on asking for, I mean, how do you define wealthy?
We are defining it as someone that can own 2 homes over $1 million.
Sir, I don't believe that is anywhere in the legislation, but you say 2
But
homes.
that will be in the legislation next year.
But 2 homes over $1 million. It sounds to me like what you really want this tax to apply to is Mary Smith, who lives in California and owns a property here.
Yeah.
So we don't know what she may own. She may live in a squalid apartment in California, for all I know, unless you're going to ask for proof of that. But you're talking about 1 home here in the state, but somebody who you say doesn't live here, but actually they don't qualify for a homeowner's exemption, so they actually could live here and just, have a home that they rent out.
So let's just talk about that example.
Yeah.
If someone has, say, a home on the mainland and they come and buy a second home in Hawaii, and that home is over $1 million, okay, is it unfair to ask them to pay the same property tax rate they're paying on the mainland? So the idea is what we'd be looking at is setting the rate at what the national average is. So, and that's combined. So the idea is that we're looking to try to find a way to do it fair. And The interesting conversation about this is this, okay? Tom is going to argue we don't need more funding. And I tried to bring up before, if you look at it through multiple measures, we do not compare to other districts. We do not compare to our private schools. And if you look deep into our budget, and we just don't fund our schools well. And so, other than some miraculous audit that's going to find all this money hidden in the sofas at our schools, how are we going to fund our schools? And as someone, it would be nice if we could fund our schools without asking anyone to pay. But in this circumstance, we are trying to find a way to increase funding in a way that's done in every other state other than Hawaii, and asking those that are the wealthiest among us to be able to contribute, to be able to fund our schools.
One of the things that has been brought up, and I think everybody concurs, is that our teachers, thank you, are not paid as much as would be nice. And I appreciate that, but I'd also like to mention that Time Magazine notes that every teacher in the whole country is underpaid. But we want our teachers here to be well paid, so that's a good thing. Now, the average Hawaii teacher salary here is, according to CNBC and other documentation, around $48,000. Oklahoma is lowest at $42,000, highest is Alaska at $82,000. And I asked you this in Hilo, Mr. Rosenlee, how much more should every teacher be paid?
I think we need to ask this question differently. And we start off the problem this way. How do we improve our schools? And the research says the most important thing in the classroom is the quality of the teacher. And so if you talk about that shortage of 1,000 classrooms, what that also means is this, that every time we have an opening, there may be no applicants or you get one applicant. You want to be very selective in who you put into a classroom. My friend, she applied to Punahou, and there were 40 applicants for one job, which meant you could be very selective. I had a friend that was literally teacher of the year at Radford and was not picked to be there. So how do we create the environment that you have lots of people that want to be teachers and you can start being very selective? And it's not one thing. You can pay teachers the greatest in the world, and still if you have an environment that's not conducive to learning, they're not going to stay either. But if you have a great environment and they can't afford to take care of the family, that won't work either. So the question is how much would it take? First of all, in order to solve our teacher shortage crisis, it's got to be a variety of things. You asked where the money would be spent. I'd love to see, number one, that anyone who wants to be a special education teacher in the state should get free college. That's what we're going to have to do to recruit teachers. We need to pay our teachers a competitive salary. Okay? One of the problems we have is, look, teachers can go teach anywhere right now, and the question is they're going to teach in places that pay them better. In our comparative districts, they spend about $15,000 to $25,000 more per teacher than we do here. And this is why we've seen since 2010, the amount of teachers leaving to go to the mainland has increased by 84%. I mean, it's easy to think of anyone can just walk into the classroom, but being a good teacher is really hard. And you want to keep the best. And if you believe in educating every child, we've got to pay our teachers a competitive wage in order to keep them, but also we've got to do the other things to make the environment conducive so they want to stay.
Of course, as I noted, this Time Magazine article says teachers all over the country are underpaid, so it's not that going to the mainland is a panacea for our teachers. So
that's a great thing you brought up that article. And so let's compare. So look, you mentioned Oklahoma. So Oklahoma has been having a huge problem because Texas pays their teachers significantly more. The Oklahoma Teacher of the Year left Oklahoma to go teach in Texas because they couldn't pay them well. Arizona used to be ranked as the worst place to teach, and now Hawaii surpassed them. And they had tens of thousands of people marching in the streets and had to pay their teachers a 90% increase. Oklahoma, it was a $6,000 increase. And it's not equal. In Boston, which has a similar cost of living to Hawaii, they don't have a teacher shortage problem. They have a teacher surplus problem because they have lots of people that want to be teachers. And so the idea is if you can pay your teachers well and if you treat education and teachers as valuable members of your society, it's something that people can respect and revere. In Massachusetts, they send their teachers here, they get training for a couple years, and then leave to go back to Massachusetts because we have become the farm system for mainland schools. And so half of the teachers in Hawaii have actually been here for less than 7 years. And the reality is we recruit every single year from the mainland in order to get teachers. And then why are we surprised then? They come here for a couple years, they get their experience, and then they go back to the mainland where they compete with people graduating from schools, and now they are better qualified. But that means that every single year, especially at some of our schools, you have this constant churn. And trust me when I say it takes years in order to become a good teacher. The first couple of years, man, that's like boot camp. It's really difficult.
Aren't salaries based on the collective bargaining process, though?
Absolutely.
So are you asking why Mr. Rosenly didn't negotiate $15,000 to $25,000 raises for the teachers?
I'm just trying to understand the process.
I would love to pay our teachers more, and the problem is this. The system is set up to make sure we do not. Because on the mainland, normally when teachers are bargaining their salaries, they are bargaining with, say, the Board of Education that controls property taxes so that the people that are negotiating the salaries have the ability to increase revenue. Our system is divided. The governor and the BOE and the DOE negotiate the salaries, but they have no ability by themselves to increase revenue. And so you mentioned something, and I want to go back to this. The legislators, the BOE, the DOE, they all agree we need to pay our teachers better. The problem is that you need to increase the funding so that you can bargain for it, but you can't bargain for it if the funding is not there.
Of course, I would like to point out the state legislature has, in fact, the ability to increase income tax. You already increased the transient accommodation tax. You have, as Mr. Yamachika mentioned, what's called plenary power, which is unlimited power to tax. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to suggest that the state does not have the ability to increase revenues when in fact they control all the taxes except for property taxes, and I believe the county also can collect fuel taxes. Is that right, Ms. Mira? Something, and there's one more?
Yes, we can collect fuel tax, and then they just approved to do the GE tax with a sunset.
Right, the quarter percent. Right, and that goes to the county. So, I mean, you know,
And
Senator Kehalai,
last year it was the HSTA's proposal to increase the GE tax.
3 years ago.
Well,
3 years ago, and that has
that's
been
up to you
something
guys.
that we've talked
I mean,
about as well. Really,
you know-
your two broad-based taxes are your general excise tax that everybody pays, tourists, visitors,
Yeah.
Kabaina, and your property tax. Those are the two broadest bases of the tax base.
And that's all under the control of the state legislature, is it
property
not?
tax.
No, not property, but I mean, that's a separate, and the property tax is what funds the counties, whereas all the rest of it funds everything else. Let me ask a question. If this tax is implemented, you know, we've been talking about more or less individuals and their property, but it would also apply, would it not, to big companies and including things like the Bishop Estate, Campbell Estate, all of anybody who's a property owner but not subject to homeowner exemption?
Corey?
You can create a charitable exemption, which was in the previous bill.
What does that mean? Could you,
Well,
are you saying that?
let me see if
are you saying
I
that
can
the
I can
Campbell
kind of
Estate-
summarize that, and that is, what Mr. Rosenly's been saying is that there is, you know, after the constitutional amendment gets passed, assuming it does, there's going to be implementing legislation that has to be done, and the implementing legislation can have exemptions, okay, and there's going to be a push and pull, because the more exemptions you enact, the less revenue you get, okay, or you can make up for it by a higher rate. So there are a lot of variables in play. You got the rate, you got the property tax base, which is what properties you actually tax, and you have exemptions.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, so the question is, would Bishop Estate, Kamehameha Schools, Campbell Estate, would they also be paying additional property taxes?
Again, the
Not if they're
probability
exempt.
is there would be, what Tom and I are both saying is, there would be exemptions that legislators would want to put into the bill to prevent certain organizations, especially charitable ones, from paying that tax. And they can do that. They can do all sorts of exemptions. In the first bill we put in, I think we had 11 separate exemptions.
So basically you're saying, well, I don't know anything about Campbell Estate. Is that a charitable
Are they
exemption?
for profit? Okay, I mean, that's the basic question.
Okay, so we don't know the answer to that question. You know, several states have actually passed special legislation to fund education, and I'll use Florida as an example. They put in the lottery, they raised $300 million, and then the Florida state legislature took $300 million out of the general funds that were allocated to education. What would stop our legislators from doing the exact same thing?
Tom makes a great point. You know, we can pass this Con-Am and do what Corey has described, raise $300 million, and then decrease the allocation to the Department of Education by $300 million. Yeah, I mean, you could do that. I would
Okay.
not advocate for that, but you could do that, absolutely.
The Hawaii State Teachers Association has pointed out that private schools like Iolani and Punahou are spending 2 to 3 times the state's per pupil spending. According to State Department of Education and other indices, this state is currently 15th in the nation in per pupil spending on K through 12. So that means we're spending more than 35 other states. But obviously, we all have great concern that our children are not uniformly getting the best education, nor do they have the best facilities. So that's a huge problem. So this goes back to the original question about the problem we're trying to solve. So if we become not 15th, but 14th or 10th, or if we become first in per pupil spending, is that going to solve whatever the problems are? Which I don't fully understand what all the problems are, because all I'm hearing is we need more money. But do you think, Senator Kahele, if we become number 1 in per pupil spending, will that solve whatever the problems are?
I mean, that's the per pupil spending, the weighted student formula, that's just one component of what we need to improve on in the Department of Education.
Can I answer that question? And you ask, it's a really good question, and I get this a lot. Does spending more money improve education? And I would also suggest there was 2 really big studies that came out in the last 2 years. One was from the National Public Radio and one was the New York Times. And specifically what the research shows is that the best investment of funding helps those students who come from the most poorest environments. Because usually those are the ones that tend to get the least qualified teachers, have the least funding. But when you actually invest in those kids, it does improve education. And I'm going to break down that number that you just said. Because if we compare it to other states, we are the only statewide school district. So 14th on the list is Illinois. But Illinois is not made up of 1 school district. It's made up of like 100. Chicago is a very expensive one. And you have about 100 counties that are rural and poor, and you average them together, and you get the Illinois per pupil expenditure. That's why it's so important if you're going to compare school districts, you got to compare us to similar school districts. And that's when we spend about $6,000 less per student than these other districts with similar cost of living. And again, you mentioned before about $10,000 to $20,000 less than, the only way we compare it is we don't have like other counties in Hawaii, so the only schools we compare ourselves to are the private schools, which tend to spend, on average, significantly more than our public schools do, with less students that are special education, English language learners, or economically disadvantaged. Because again, even for economic disadvantage, we have to give free breakfast and free lunch, we have to give them busing, and also they have other needs that we have to provide for those children.
A question from an audience member is, why should we amend our foundational document, the state constitution, to provide a property tax for a special interest, specifically it's education in this case, and if we do that, is that going to be the plan going forward? Do we then amend our foundational document, the state constitution, to provide for money for breakfast for the kids, or for getting more doctors here in the state, or for paying for our island's 2 state hospitals? And the essence of this question appears to be not whether public education is a worthy cause, because we all agree it is, but whether amending our state constitution for one specific tax is the right approach. And I'd like to ask whoever would like to address it to do so. Tom, you're sort of an overall kind of guy. Kai, you're a state senator. Help us understand why this is the right approach.
Well, as I guess a couple of speakers mentioned earlier, there are, problems that happen when you let the genie out of the bottle. Okay, you yourself mentioned the transient accommodations tax, which was enacted in '86. Oh, we just need this to fund the convention center, just to build it, and it was a 5% tax. That was in 1986. After the convention center's built, it'll go away. We won't have it anymore. That's what was represented at the time. Now it's 2018. The tax is not 5%. It's 10.25%. And it's going through all these different causes that weren't even contemplated at the time. At the time, it wasn't even contemplated that the TAT would be a supplementary funding source for the counties. Okay, it wasn't contemplated that it would go to tourism marketing. It wasn't contemplated that it would pay for Turtle Bay, and now it does. So these things tend to morph over time, and that's not the only example. Okay, another example is the barrel tax. The barrel tax is something that's imposed on every barrel of imported fuel products. It was enacted at 5 cents per barrel. It's now $1.05, which is a slight increase, and it goes to fund the Department of Land and Natural Resources, among other things, conservation programs, as well as creating a fund for environmental oil spills, which was the original intent. Okay, other examples abound. The problem is we have a lousy history when it comes to, okay, let's enact this specific tax for this specific purpose, because it morphs. That's been the history.
Ms. Miura, one of the things that all the counties have expressed a concern about is that somehow by the state now taxing real properties in the counties, this would somehow impede the ability of the counties to then raise property taxes as they need to provide appropriate funding. It's not clear to me and to a couple of questioners why it would stop the county from raising property taxes, because this would be definitely a state tax, even though it's on county real properties.
Yeah, this is an additional tax onto the county real properties. So if you're already being taxed at, let's say, $11.10 for your vacant lot, and the state comes in, and even if they go at the lowest number of $300 million or at the number that is being suggested, we still have to come up with $45 million, or the state does through their measures on how they're going to tax us. So let's say that adds even a minimal $2 onto that tax that we already have. So now you're at $13.10. The county comes along and we're going to have a recession eventually because that's how things go. It's cyclical.
So just let me interrupt. When you said $13, you're talking about the tax on property that is not homeowner exemption property.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. No homeowner's exemption. It can be vacant land is in the residential class. It could be a house that's being rented as an affordable rental. It could be several things.
Okay. And currently homeowner exempt properties pay about $6 per?
$6.15 per thousand.
Okay.
So we're at
Just
about
want to clarify
40%
where we are.
less right now in that.
Okay. So non-homeowner exempt properties today pay almost twice.
Correct.
Okay, just checking. Keep
That's
going.
correct. And on top of it, there's a homeowner exemption that adds to it, but we'll just look at the tax rate for now.
Okay.
And that is different from all the counties. We are the highest tax rate for the residential class versus all the counties. And that, I don't think, was taken into consideration when this was discussed over on Oahu. But if you are being taxed at $13.10 per thousand, then the county has that decline and we have to come back in. The residential class really did take most of the hit in the last time the county raised the taxes because the county council was trying very hard to protect the homeowners classification, affordable rental properties, as well as the agricultural class. So if we have to come back in and tell residential, okay, the state's getting this much more from you, but we need another dollar onto your tax rate, they're going to come in and fight even harder, because they're not just paying 40% more, they're already doubled, even though the county has nothing to do with the additional charge that is being put down from the state. So it is going to be harder for us to come back later and to do an additional tax onto them.
Do we really believe that this proposal will solve our teacher supply problems, that we will get more teachers, more good teachers?
I think it's a step in the right direction. And again, what's the alternative? We keep this up, and like I said, we've seen the amount of vacancies increase by over 60% in the last, since 2010. So we've got to do something. Is this, the ideal situation? No, I think I would hope for even more revenue, but there's also got to be other things that we need to do. And by the way, HSTA is not just going for revenue. There are many things that we are trying to pursue in order to improve education. Under the new law that was passed by Congress, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, so we're trying to go to project-based learning, so the kids aren't just filling in bubbles, but trying to do real-world project-based skills. And that's something that we've been pushing the Board of Education, the DOE, to do. We've been fighting hard for special education. We spent the whole year on a task force with the DOE to try to come up with ideas, and we just came out recently with that too. So there's not just one silver bullet that's going to improve education. But funding is not going to fix the problem, but we cannot fix the problem without funding.
Senator, Lisa, you wanted to add something?
I did. Through this, the county has talked to a lot of teachers, and a lot of teachers have reached out because they are family members to staff or they're in our mayor administration. And there is a lot of frustration. I don't hear as much people say we need the raises. I hear a lot more frustration with the DOE and how it's being run. And I realize HSTA can't control the DOE because fundamentally I don't think they're part of their bargaining unit. But I feel like when people come to the county and tell us cut our services, cut the fat, cut this, cut that, clean up your own area, the DOE should do the same thing first before coming out and asking for, well, they're not even asking for the money. It's HSTA doing the ask for them. But what are they doing to fix the areas or the problems? There are teachers leaving, but they're not just leaving because of the pay, they're leaving because of the frustration with how messed up the DOE system is. And I think people need to really take a look at that. And I realize that's not the county's kuleana, and it's not a fact maybe of my tax office, but that is the frustration that comes in when it comes to this bill. And I don't see that being addressed at all.
Well, there was an article in the Star Advertiser on August 19th, which talked about the fact that the Department of Education could be getting somewhere between $26 million and $38 million in reimbursements from Medicaid health services, but they haven't applied for them, and what our state got was $260,000, and it was believed, according to the Star Advertiser article, that we should, as I said, have gotten between $26 and $38 million. So Senator Kehele, since you're going to be the contact with the Department of Education, maybe there's ways to at least ask them to start collecting money that they already are entitled to. And there's some laws on the books that allow them to collect money in other ways. Specifically, if a new school needs to go in, they can do property assessments in that area, which they have not chosen to do so far. But just the whole discussion of, as Corey said, there's many, many things that could be done. And it seems like the state legislature would be encouraged to help facilitate those discussions. Like if DOE can go out and ask the feds for 26 to 38 million, why are they not doing it?
Absolutely. Making not just the DOE but government more efficient, more proper stewards of your taxpayer dollars should be a goal for us every year. There has been, I don't know if during my short tenure at the legislature, proposals to audit the Department of Education. I would support that. I think by auditing the Department of Education gives you an opportunity to highlight areas where we can fiscally improve the budget and where we can save money, and we can redirect those funds to some of the things that we're talking about.
Just let me mention that I called Les Condo, who is the state auditor this week, because I want to understand about this whole thing about auditing. Department of Education has an internal auditor who should be doing audits. Les told me that, well, I found the last audit overall of the State Department of Education was in 1983, and at that time its budget was $818 million. Today it's $2 billion. But he also said that the department is so huge that just asking to do an audit is probably not practical. He only has 12 people. But if the state legislature did ask for an audit of specific programs, that would be practical to do. So there are ways to do it.
Let me give you an example. When we passed the rail bill last year, part of that legislation appropriated $1 million and 4 positions to the state auditor, Les Condo, to do a audit of HART.
Of art?
HART.
HART, oh, the
All
rail.
rapid transits. And so, you know, that could be something that is part of this legislation, that if we are going to do this, then we're also going to require an audit. Now, an audit it doesn't happen overnight. You know, you might get a draft about like 12 months from now, you know.
Right, it wouldn't be, and he mentioned that
it takes a while to
take a
do an
long
audit,
time.
But almost every state does independent audit.
I think it's absolutely
So I think
warranted.
it would be necessary to find where the inefficiencies are. And there were 3 actually acts implemented that would help raise revenue for DOE, and so far we haven't seen any action on this. One would create a pilot program to allow underutilized DOE land to be developed for affordable workforce housing or leased or sold to generate additional revenue for public education. 2, requires the city and county to transfer county land under public schools to state, and gives DOE power to hold title to proportional and use them for public educational purposes. And Act 245, establish a process for DOE to impose impact fees on new residential developments. So I guess the question is, why isn't the DOE taking advantage of these opportunities when they could be raising revenue through these methods?
And so, Sherry, I'd ask you, from those 3 things, how many schools have been built and how much money has been raised through those 3 programs?
Well, has the discussion been
Altogether,
made on this?
the reason why, and I'll tell you why. 21st century schools, the problem is they were going to sell school land to build new property, and they found out that building the new property would have first destroyed that school and would have been more expensive than the income they would have brought in. School impact fees, we were fully supportive of that one. And the same people that are against this fought against that so that new buildings coming in would not have to be paid for. And altogether, that's only brought in about $5 million. And the Medicaid reimbursement you mentioned, I want to explain that too. Because we fought hard, HSTA did, to get that Medicaid reimbursement. We were fighting the legislature to get that money passed to do it. The problem was, the DOE's fear is that it would have had these autism specialists come into the schools that would have been reimbursed through Medicaid reimbursements, and they would have said, these students need these services, and the DOE knew that with current funding, there's no way they could provide the services. And they were afraid of a lawsuit, which is why they were fighting against this Medicaid reimbursement. So everything, if you dig a little deeper, has a larger story of why these things were not working to begin with.
I apologize, we're going slightly over time. One final question for you, Senator Kahele. The state legislature does control all taxes, as has been pointed out. We have income taxes. You have raised the transient accommodation tax. Why doesn't the state legislature just give more money to the Department of Education if you feel that is the solution to the problems?
Because it's going to have to come from somewhere else. It's going to have to come from probably Medicaid. It's going to have to come from Health and Human Services. You know, you're going to take it from one department to another department. And I don't think that's the answer. You know, we need to have a broader conversation of revenue generated, you know, for the state, what it's used for, the high cost of housing in Hawaii, speculative people that buy properties that raise the cost of housing is $800,000 in Hawaii. That's unsustainable.
Isn't that on Oahu, though? Our average home price here on this island is a little lower.
I mean, it is a proven fact that we have one of the lowest property taxes in the nation. And if you increase property taxes, you can lower home prices. If you make more lands available for more homes, you can lower the cost of housing. That's something we have to address because we have out-of-state investors, we have mainland investors, people that are buying speculative properties that are raising the cost of homes. We now have Airbnb, vacation rentals. People are using their homes for transient rentals. That has to be addressed. So these are tough questions that we need to talk about. But if you're going to take it from another department, and the DOE is already getting $2 billion, or almost 20% of the state's budget, it's going to have to come from someplace else. And I just don't see where you're going to raise $200 to $300 million to do that, unless the Council on Revenues reports, a lot more revenue coming into the state, and I don't see that happening.
Well, like I said, we have sort of an empty chair here, because it'd be helpful if the Department of Education would take part in these discussions so we could have a better feel for what their issues are as they see them. I need to give each one of you an opportunity to make some final comments because we are definitely at the end of our time, and again, I apologize. Lisa Miura, why don't you take 1 minute and give us your final thoughts?
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Senator Kahele for being here. He really has been supportive of the counties, and he is one of the few legislators on this island that shows up. And I even give Corey credit. His job is to serve the teachers, and he's trying very hard to sell us this rotten apple ballot, but the county's concern is valid. Your Real Property Tax Office is the group that would be collecting this tax. We're the ones that are supposed to do it, and it's sounds like a pretty raw deal for the County of Hawaii and for the taxpayers. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Menor McNamara, closing comments.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and echo Lisa's comments. Thank you, Senator Kahele, for being here as well. Corey, appreciate your passion and your representation of the public teachers. As I mentioned earlier, think about the constitutional amendment of how this will impact not only next session, but future sessions. Again, once this is in place, it's extremely hard to reverse. The quote, shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to support a public education? It is vague. And so we believe this will increase the cost of living, increase the cost of doing business, and also that there's no guarantee that the monies will go towards public education. In fact, Corey mentioned in a conference his deepest, darkest fear that there's no guarantee that the DOE will get more money than it currently does. So again, it's vague, it's unknown. Who knows what will happen next session, following session, or future sessions. But the CONHAM, when it passes, it's in place.
Thank you. Senator Kahele.
When I visit schools across my district, and I go into classrooms that have 30 to 35 kids, they're hot, teachers are stressed out, they're dealing with a myriad of issues. It really drives home the fact that we have to do something about our public education system. It is the best investment that we can make to build a better Hawaii for us all. And this is the closest we have gotten to addressing this funding issue. I wish the question was more narrow in scope. I wish it was the Senate version of the bill. I wish there was a lot more definition, but the fact of the matter is it's not. It's a question that we have to deal with. And it puts you, the voters, in a very difficult position because you have to trust your legislators and the legislative process that we're going to put forth a bill that hopefully we can all agree on, but that will address the fundamental issue we have is how do we fund public education in Hawaii. I voted for this bill. I'm going to vote yes on this bill. I'm encouraging my family and friends to vote yes on this bill. I hope you will as well. Give us the opportunity to try and scope this bill in the legislative session. Everything I've said tonight, I can promise you I will do in the legislature. I'm one of 76, but I think it's it's a good start in the right direction. Thank you.
When we were in Hilo, Corey had brought with him a woman named Deborah Zeisman from the Hawaii Children's Action Network, and she made the comment that if this passes, then we need to just get our legislators, such as Senator Kahele, to kind of do it in the right way. But we have a problem, Senator Kahele, in that we only have 4 senators and 7 representatives, and Oahu outnumbers us every single time, and that's always a big concern. So just use your heavy influence. Tom Yamachika.
Well, thank you so much to the organizers of this forum for holding this. I think this was a tremendous educational opportunity for everybody, and a great start of the conversation that we really need to have about addressing some of the issues that face not only our public schools but also state government in general. You know, we, as the foundation, don't take positions on legislation. We just try to educate people on the you know, the pluses and the minuses and the constraints that that people are facing, and I think we've been able to do that here. We just hope that this is a good way for voters like yourself to be more educated on the issue and understand what you're voting for when you're asked to vote on this measure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Corey Rosenlee.
At the end of the day, this is really about, you know, our keiki. And I want to share a story. There was a special education teacher that came up to me and she was crying. And she said, at our school, they only had 2 special education teachers. And substitutes are not allowed to do individual education plans. So one of the teachers left. She was just overburdened. That meant this special education teacher had to teach her class, then get a sub for her class to teach the other class, and was dealing with 40 students that were special education. She said, I'm so stressed out, I can't take this, I'm going to leave. And the only reason I stay is because of the kids. And she was worried that if she left, all of a sudden those 40 kids would not have any qualified special education teacher to be able to deal with them. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure people in the audience have all sorts of questions and ideas, and we're talking about education. A no vote basically kills the conversation. It has been extremely difficult to get us even to this place, to have this conversation about education in Hawaii. And I'm hoping people will vote yes and continue this conversation about how we improve our schools in Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our panelists because I know this kind of discussion is challenging and difficult. Thank you for those who came from Oahu or Hilo or Waimea, wherever you were. On behalf of the Konokohala Chamber of Commerce and the Community Forums Group, we really want to thank you for being here and for being interested, because it's very important for us to make the decisions about what happens in the future.
This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island, we are one community.